In the early 1930s, the world believed Germany had been stripped of its ability to build a powerful air force. After the Treaty of Versailles, the country was forbidden from developing modern military aircraft. On paper, Germany's skies were supposed to remain quiet and defenseless. But behind closed doors, engineers and pilots were already working on something that would soon terrify the skies of Europe. Hidden research programs quietly pushed forward a new generation of aircraft design. German engineers knew that if war came again, speed and firepower would decide everything in the air. Dogfights were becoming faster, deadlier, and more technical. The biplanes of World War I were quickly becoming obsolete. What Germany needed was a sleek, modern fighter that could climb faster, dive harder, and strike before the enemy even knew it was there. At the center of this effort was a bold aircraft designer named Willy Messerschmitt. Unlike many engineers of his time, Messerschmitt believed that fighter aircraft needed to be built around speed and efficiency above all else. His philosophy was simple but radical. Make the aircraft as light as possible, give it a powerful engine, and design it to climb and strike faster than anything else in the sky. In 1934, Germany's newly reformed Air Force issued a request for a next-generation fighter. Several companies competed for the contract. The requirements were ambitious for the time. The aircraft had to be fast, heavily armed, and capable of operating at high altitude. It also needed to outperform anything being built in Britain, France, or the Soviet Union. Messerschmitt's design looked different from the moment engineers rolled it out of the hangar. The aircraft had a sleek, narrow fuselage and thin wings designed for speed. Instead of bulky structures common in earlier aircraft, every part of the machine was built to reduce drag. The landing gear was narrow and attached to the fuselage rather than the wings, a decision that helped make the wings lighter but also made the plane notoriously difficult to land. That aircraft would become the Messerschmitt Bf 109. When the prototype first took to the air in 1935, test pilots immediately noticed something unusual. The plane accelerated faster than most fighters of the time. It climbed aggressively, almost like a rocket compared to older designs. Pilots reported that once the aircraft gained altitude, it could dive on an enemy with terrifying speed. But the Bf 109 was not just fast. It was built around a new generation of engines that gave it incredible power for its size. Early models were equipped with advanced inline engines that allowed the aircraft to slice cleanly through the air. Combined with its lightweight structure, the result was a fighter that could reach speeds that many rivals simply couldn't match. Yet, the aircraft also had a darker side. Its narrow landing gear made takeoffs and landings dangerous, especially for inexperienced pilots. Many early test pilots struggled to control the aircraft on the ground. Accidents were common. Some Luftwaffe pilots even joked that surviving the runway was sometimes harder than surviving combat. Despite these risks, German military planners saw something extraordinary in the design. The aircraft had the potential to completely reshape air combat. If flown by skilled pilots, it could climb above enemy formations, dive with overwhelming speed, fire its weapons, and disappear before opponents could react. But there was still one problem. The aircraft had never been tested in real combat. That opportunity came in an unexpected place. In 1936, civil war erupted in Spain. What began as a brutal internal conflict quickly became a testing ground for Europe's most advanced weapons. Germany secretly sent aircraft, pilots, and advisors to support the nationalist forces. For German engineers and commanders, Spain became the perfect laboratory. Among the aircraft sent to test their capabilities was the new Bf 109. At first, the fighter was introduced in small numbers. German pilots flew alongside older aircraft while quietly studying how the new machine performed against enemy fighters. the skies over Spain were chaotic. Soviet-built aircraft flown by Republican pilots frequently engaged German and Italian planes in fierce dogfights. The results shocked many observers. When the Bf-109 entered combat, it quickly proved superior to many of the fighters it faced. Its speed advantage allowed German pilots to control when and how battles began. If they wanted to attack, they attacked from above. If the situation turned dangerous, they simply climbed away from the fight. This new tactic became known as energy fighting. Instead of circling endlessly in slow dogfights like pilots had done during World War I, Bf-109 pilots used altitude and speed as weapons. They would dive down on enemy aircraft, fire in a short burst, and then climb back into the sky before the opponent could respond. To many pilots facing it for the first time, the attacks felt almost supernatural. One moment the sky was empty. The next moment a fast-moving fighter would streak past, guns blazing, before vanishing above the clouds. The aircraft's weapons made these attacks even more deadly. Early models carried machine guns synchronized to fire through the propeller arc, allowing pilots to aim directly with the nose of the aircraft. This meant that if a Bf-109 pilot lined up properly, the burst of fire could be devastating. Combat reports from Spain began reaching military leaders across Europe. Intelligence officers in Britain and France started hearing troubling rumors about a new German fighter that seemed faster and more aggressive than anything currently in service. At the same time, German pilots were gaining something even more valuable than victory: experience. By the time the Spanish Civil War was winding down, the Bf-109 had already proven itself in hundreds of combat sorties. German pilots had refined their tactics, learned the aircraft's strengths, and understood its weaknesses. They knew how to use altitude, surprise, and speed to dominate slower opponents. When these pilots returned home, they carried those lessons with them. Germany now had something no other nation possessed at that moment: a modern fighter aircraft that had already been tested in real combat, flown by pilots who had already learned how to kill with it. And that combination would soon shock the world, because when war finally erupted across Europe in 1939, Allied pilots would come face to face with this aircraft for the first time. Many of them had never heard of it before. They didn't know its strengths. They didn't know its tactics. But within the first weeks of combat, one thing would become painfully clear. The sleek fighter designed by Willy Messerschmitt was not just another aircraft. It was the beginning of a new kind of air war. When war finally erupted in Europe in September 1939, most Allied air forces believed they were prepared for the battles ahead. Britain and France had modern fighters, trained pilots, and years of military planning behind them. Many commanders assumed that air combat would resemble the clashes seen during the previous war. Fighters circling each other in slow-turning battles, trying to gain position before firing. But the pilots who took to the skies in those first weeks quickly realized something had changed. During the German invasion of Poland, the Luftwaffe unleashed its new generation of aircraft with overwhelming speed and coordination. Among the bombers and dive bombers, a fast and aggressive fighter began appearing in the skies, an aircraft that Polish pilots had rarely encountered before. It was the Messerschmitt Bf-109. At first, many Allied pilots underestimated it. On paper, it was just another single-engine fighter. But the moment combat began, its true capabilities became painfully obvious. The Bf-109 didn't fight like the aircraft most pilots were used to facing. Instead of turning and circling in traditional dogfights, German pilots often appeared suddenly from above. They dove at tremendous speed, fired their weapons in a short and deadly burst, and then climbed away before the enemy could even react. For the pilots on the receiving end, the experience was terrifying. Imagine flying a patrol at several thousand feet, scanning the horizon for enemy aircraft. The sky looks empty. Everything seems calm. Then suddenly a dark shape drops out of the sun at incredible speed. Machine gun fire rips past your cockpit before you even understand what is happening. By the time you turn to face the attacker, the fighter that struck you is already climbing back toward the clouds. This was not accidental. German pilots had refined these tactics years earlier during the Spanish Civil War, where they learned that altitude and speed could be more powerful than maneuverability. Instead of fighting fair battles, they attacked with surprise and overwhelming momentum. The early days of the war proved just how effective these methods were. When Germany launched the invasion of Poland, the Luftwaffe fought bravely but faced enormous disadvantages. Many of their aircraft were older and slower. Some pilots flew fighters that had been designed years before the Bf-109 even existed. In the skies above Poland, the difference in technology became brutally clear. Bf-109 pilots often climbed higher than their opponents and waited. From above, they could watch enemy formations and choose the perfect moment to strike. When they attacked, gravity gave them extra speed, allowing their aircraft to become nearly unstoppable during the dive. Polish pilots tried to fight back with skill and courage. Some even managed to shoot down German fighters, but the speed advantage of the Bf-109 made survival extremely difficult. Even when an enemy pilot spotted the German fighter in time, catching it was another matter entirely. The Bf-109 could climb rapidly and escape vertically, something many older aircraft simply could not do. Within weeks, the Polish campaign ended. The Luftwaffe had gained even more combat experience, and the reputation of the Bf-109 continued to grow. But the real test came the following year. In 1940, Germany launched a massive offensive across Western Europe in what became known as the Battle of France. This time, the Luftwaffe faced stronger opponents. French and British fighter pilots were experienced, well-trained, and equipped with modern aircraft. Yet many of them were encountering the Bf-109 for the first time. British and French pilots quickly noticed how aggressively German fighters controlled the battle. The Bf-109 could climb higher and accelerate faster than many of its rivals. German pilots used these advantages constantly, diving into combat when they had the upper hand and escaping whenever the situation turned dangerous. For the effect on Allied pilots was unsettling. In previous conflicts, dogfights often turned into long turning battles where skill and endurance decided the winner. But against the Bf-109, those battles often ended before they even began. The German fighter's design allowed it to accelerate rapidly during a dive, turning altitude into raw speed. That speed meant its weapons could be delivered with devastating accuracy in a very short time window. Even a single burst could destroy an aircraft. Reports from Allied squadrons began describing encounters with a fighter that seemed to appear and disappear at will. Some pilots claimed the aircraft felt almost impossible to catch once it chose to disengage. French pilots flying their own modern fighters tried to counter the Bf-109 in direct combat. In some cases they succeeded, but the Germans rarely fought on equal terms. They preferred to strike from a position of advantage. This method made the aircraft feel far more dangerous than its numbers suggested. Another factor increased the fear surrounding the Bf-109, the discipline of the German pilots flying it. Luftwaffe fighter units had trained extensively in formation tactics, particularly a system known as the finger four formation. Instead of flying in tight, rigid groups, German fighters spread out in pairs, giving each pilot better visibility and flexibility. This allowed them to spot enemies earlier and respond more quickly during combat. For Allied pilots used to older formations, the difference was shocking. German fighters often seemed to work together like predators hunting in a pack. One Bf-109 would attack, forcing an enemy pilot to maneuver defensively. While the distracted pilot tried to escape, another German fighter would move in from a different direction and strike. Within weeks of the campaign in France, the skies were filled with stories about the mysterious German fighter that dominated high-speed combat. Pilots spoke about its sharp nose, its aggressive climb, and the way it seemed to appear suddenly out of the sun. By the time the battle for Western Europe ended, thousands of Allied pilots had already learned the same lesson. This aircraft was not just another fighter in the sky. It was a machine specifically designed to hunt. And soon, as the war moved across the English Channel, even more pilots would discover just how deadly it could be. By the summer of 1940, the war in Europe had taken a dramatic turn. France had fallen with shocking speed, and much of Western Europe was now under German control. Across the English Channel, Britain stood alone. For Germany to invade the island, one critical objective had to be achieved first: control of the skies. What followed would become one of the most famous air campaigns in history, the Battle of Britain. For the first time, the German Luftwaffe would face a determined and highly organized air defense system. Waiting for them were squadrons of the Royal Air Force, flying two of Britain's most important fighters, the Supermarine Spitfire and the Hawker Hurricane. British pilots were confident in their aircraft. Both fighters were fast, agile, and well-armed, but there was one major difference between the coming battle and the campaigns fought over Poland and France. Now the German fighters had to operate at the very edge of their range. The main escort fighter protecting German bombers was still the Messerschmitt Bf-109. It was a deadly aircraft in combat, but it had a critical weakness that would shape the entire battle: fuel capacity. When Bf-109s flew from airfields in northern France towards southern England, they had only a limited amount of time over enemy territory. Pilots often had barely 20 minutes to fight before they had to turn back towards France or risk running out of fuel over the channel. This limitation created enormous pressure during combat. German fighter pilots had to climb quickly, locate British aircraft, escort bombers, fight off interceptors, and then return home before their fuel ran dangerously low. Every minute in the sky mattered. Despite these constraints, the Bf-109 still proved to be an extremely dangerous opponent. When German bomber formations approached British airspace, RAF radar stations often detected them early. British fighters scrambled to intercept, climbing rapidly to meet the incoming raid. Soon the sky filled with twisting contrails and streaking aircraft as fighters from both sides collided at high speed. British pilots quickly discovered that the Bf-109 was a formidable adversary. The aircraft climbed rapidly and accelerated aggressively during dives. German pilots used this advantage constantly. Instead of staying locked in turning battles, they often attacked with sudden high-speed passes, firing and then climbing away to reset the fight. The Bf-109 was particularly effective when diving from higher altitude. Gravity allowed the aircraft to build tremendous speed, making it extremely difficult for British pilots to evade once the attack began. Many RAF pilots learned a painful lesson during those early encounters. If a Bf-109 appeared above you with speed, escaping its attack could be extremely difficult. Yet the battle over Britain also revealed something interesting. While the German fighter had powerful advantages, it was not unbeatable. The Supermarine Spitfire proved to be a worthy rival in many situations. The Spitfire had exceptional turning ability and excellent high-speed handling. In certain types of dogfights, British pilots could match or even outperform the Bf-109. The Hawker Hurricane, although slightly slower, was also a stable gun platform and extremely durable. Many RAF pilots preferred using Hurricanes to attack German bombers, while Spitfires engaged the escorting fighters. As the weeks passed, the skies above southern England became one of the most intense air battlefields the world had ever seen. Hundreds of aircraft could be involved in a single day of fighting. Pilots climbed, dove, rolled, and fired in a chaotic aerial ballet where a single mistake could mean death. For RAF pilots, the Bf-109 quickly earned a reputation as a predator. Its sleek nose and narrow wings gave it a distinctive silhouette. Experienced British pilots learned to recognize it instantly. When they spotted one above them, alarms went off in their minds immediately. Many described the moment when a Bf-109 attacked as sudden and violent. A German fighter might appear out of the sun, its guns flashing for a second, before streaking past at incredible speed. Sometimes the entire encounter lasted only a few seconds. Pilots who survived these attacks often reported the same thing. The speed of the German fighter made it extremely difficult to react in time. However, the battle also exposed the aircraft's limitations. Because the Bf-109 had such limited time over Britain, German pilots often had to break off combat earlier than they wanted. British pilots sometimes noticed enemy fighters suddenly turning away from the fight, even when they seemed to have the advantage. Those German pilots were racing back towards France before their fuel gauges dropped too low. This fuel limitation frustrated many Luftwaffe commanders. The Bf-109 was clearly capable of dominating the skies in short bursts, but it could not remain over England long enough to fully protect the bombers it escorted. As a result, German bombers were sometimes left exposed just as British fighters arrived in large numbers. Despite this, the Bf-109 still inflicted heavy losses on the Royal Air Force. German fighter pilots, many already veterans of earlier campaigns, used their experience to deadly effect. They coordinated attacks carefully, often working in pairs to trap British pilots. One fighter would engage the enemy while the other watched for opportunities to strike. For British pilots caught in these traps, the situation could become deadly in seconds. The battle raged for months. Hundreds of aircraft from both sides were shot down in numbers that seemed impossible. Pilots parachuted into fields, villages, and sometimes the cold waters of the English Channel. Yet through it all, the Bf-109 remained one of the most feared aircraft in the sky. It was fast, aggressive, and flown by pilots who had already learned the brutal lessons of modern air combat. By the end of the campaign, the world had witnessed something extraordinary. Britain had survived the onslaught, and Germany had failed to achieve complete air superiority. But the reputation of the German fighter had only grown stronger, because for every pilot who faced it in combat, one truth became clear. The Bf-109 was not simply a fighter. In the right hands, it was a weapon, designed to strike quickly, vanish instantly, and leave chaos behind in the sky.
By the middle years of the war, the reputation of the Messerschmitt Bf-109 had grown into something almost legendary among Allied pilots. It was no longer just another enemy fighter in the sky. It had become a symbol of danger, an aircraft that seemed to appear at the worst possible moment and disappear before anyone could stop it. But the real reason many Allied pilots feared the Bf-109 went far beyond its speed or its design. The darker truth was that the aircraft was being flown by some of the most experienced and deadly fighter pilots the world had ever seen. Unlike many Allied air forces early in the war, Germany had developed a system that kept successful fighter pilots in combat for long periods of time. Instead of rotating them out after a limited number of missions, Luftwaffe aces often remained on the front lines for years. Every battle they survived made them more dangerous. By 1942 and 1943, some of these pilots had accumulated hundreds of combat missions. One of the most famous was Erich Hartmann. Flying the Bf-109, Hartmann would eventually become the highest-scoring fighter ace in history. His final tally reached an astonishing 352 aerial victories. What made his record even chilling was how he achieved it. Hartmann believed in patience. Instead of charging recklessly into battle, he often stalked his targets carefully. He would climb above enemy formations and wait silently, watching for the perfect opportunity. When he finally attacked, he did so from extremely close range to guarantee a kill. Many pilots who faced him never even realized what had happened until it was too late. Another legendary figure was Adolf Galland, one of the Luftwaffe's most skilled commanders. Galland understood the strengths of the Bf-109 better than almost anyone. He once famously joked that all he needed from a fighter aircraft was a powerful engine and a gun. The Bf-109 delivered both. Pilots like Hartmann and Galland turned the aircraft into something far more dangerous than a machine. They turned it into a hunting weapon. The tactics they used were terrifyingly effective. German fighter pilots rarely attacked head-on unless necessary. Instead, they preferred ambush. They climbed above enemy aircraft and approached from the direction of the sun, making themselves difficult to see. Once in position, they would dive rapidly, fire a short burst, and pull away before anyone could respond. To the pilots being attacked, it often felt like the sky itself had turned against them. Imagine flying in formation with dozens of other aircraft, scanning the horizon constantly for threats. The sky is bright, the sun glaring above. Suddenly, tracers rip past your wing. An aircraft nearby bursts into flames. You look up, but the attacker has already climbed away. This kind of combat created enormous psychological pressure. Bomber crews in particular feared the Bf-109. Allied bombers often flew long missions deep into enemy territory, sometimes for hours at a time. They were large, heavy aircraft and far less maneuverable than fighters. If German interceptors arrived, the bombers had little choice but to rely on their defensive guns. When German fighter pilots regularly appeared, bomber gunners had only seconds to react. German pilots exploited this weakness perfectly. They attacked quickly, sometimes firing heavy cannon rounds that could rip through the structure of a bomber in a single burst. One well-placed attack could destroy an aircraft carrying an entire crew. Many bomber crews described the moment German fighters appeared as one of the most terrifying experiences of the war. The attacks were fast and brutal. Fighters would streak through the formation, guns blazing, before disappearing again. Even when bombers shot back successfully, the Bf-109's speed often allowed it to escape before taking fatal damage. What made this even more frightening was the sheer skill of the pilots flying these attacks. By this stage of the war, many German aces had hundreds or even thousands of flight hours. They knew their aircraft intimately. They understood exactly how to position themselves for the deadliest shot. One common tactic used by experienced Bf-109 pilots was to close the distance extremely quickly before firing. Instead of shooting from far away, they waited until they were just a few dozen meters behind the enemy aircraft. At that range, their guns were devastating. Many Allied pilots later described seeing a Bf-109 appear suddenly behind them, growing larger in the cockpit window with terrifying speed. Before they could react, cannon shells were already tearing through their aircraft. The effectiveness of these tactics led to staggering victory counts among German aces. Pilots like Erich Hartmann, Gerhard Barkhorn, and many others achieved victory totals that seemed almost unbelievable. Barkhorn alone scored over 300 aerial victories while flying German fighters, most of them Bf-109s. To Allied pilots hearing these numbers, the message was clear. They were not just fighting an aircraft, they were facing some of the most experienced aerial hunters in history. And yet, there was another dark reality behind these records. The war on the Eastern Front was enormous in scale.
Massive air battles between German and Soviet aircraft created endless opportunities for combat. German pilots often flew multiple missions in a single day, sometimes engaging in battle again and again. For the most skilled among them, every sortie became another chance to add to their score. But the cost was enormous. Many of these pilots eventually died in combat as the war dragged on and Allied air power grew stronger. Still, during the height of their power, the combination of experienced pilots and the deadly Bf-109 created a fearsome presence in the sky. Allied pilots knew that if a Bf-109 appeared behind them, they might have only seconds to survive. And in many cases, those seconds decided everything. By 1943 and 1944, the air war had shifted dramatically. The Allies were producing newer, faster, and more heavily armed fighters like the P-51 Mustang and the P-47 Thunderbolt. These planes were designed to challenge the dominance of the Luftwaffe in Europe. Yet, despite technological advances, the Messerschmitt Bf-109 remained a formidable adversary. Its design had been ahead of its time, and the pilots flying it were among the most experienced airmen in history. The Bf-109 had undergone multiple upgrades over the course of the war. Engines became more powerful, armament was enhanced with heavier cannons, and aerodynamic refinements allowed it to continue competing against newer Allied fighters. Each variant was designed to adapt to the changing conditions of aerial warfare, keeping it relevant even as newer aircraft entered the sky. When American bombers began long-range raids over Germany, they quickly learned just how dangerous the Bf-109 still was. Escort fighters would fly ahead to protect the bombers, but German pilots had become masters of intercept tactics. They would climb to high altitude, waiting silently above the bomber streams, and then strike with sudden precision. The attack would often be so fast and coordinated that even experienced American pilots were caught off guard. Despite the Bf-109's age, it still possessed one terrifying advantage: the skill of its pilots. Veterans who had survived countless missions knew how to exploit every strength of the aircraft. They understood its speed, its climb rate, and its devastating weaponry. By combining these factors, they were able to engage multiple enemies at once, striking quickly and withdrawing before the Allies could counterattack effectively. The psychological impact of facing a Bf-109 in combat was immense. Pilots described the feeling of being hunted by a machine that seemed to anticipate their every move. Even when flying superior aircraft, many Allied pilots admitted that encountering a Bf-109 in experienced hands filled them with dread. The aircraft was not just a tool of war, it had become a symbol of fear in the skies over Europe. One notable tactic that kept the Bf-109 relevant late into the war was the continued use of energy fighting. German pilots used altitude, speed, and surprise to maximize their advantages while minimizing exposure to return fire. This allowed older aircraft to compete with faster, more heavily armed fighters. Even the mighty P-51 Mustang, capable of sustained high-speed flight, could find itself outmaneuvered in a well-executed dive or climbing attack by a veteran Bf-109 pilot. The effectiveness of the Bf-109 during the final years of the war was not only about its performance, but also about the system in which it operated. Luftwaffe units were highly disciplined, coordinating attacks in pairs or small groups, watching each other's backs, and maintaining constant situational awareness. This coordination turned a single fighter into part of a lethal network, capable of inflicting massive losses in a very short time. Even as the Allies gained air superiority in 1944 and 1945, the Bf-109 continued to claim lives. Its pilots often became local legends within their units, achieving remarkable numbers of victories even when the strategic situation was turning against Germany. Every encounter with the aircraft carried the risk of sudden, unexpected destruction, and Allied pilots never underestimated it. After the war, historians and veterans alike reflected on the legacy of the Bf-109. Its combination of cutting-edge design, adaptability, and the deadly skill of its pilots created a weapon that defined air combat during World War II. Even decades later, accounts from surviving Allied pilots spoke of the terror and respect inspired by encountering the German fighter. The Bf-109 was more than a machine. It was a symbol of what happens when engineering, tactics, and experience converge in the hands of those willing to push the limits. Its shadow stretched across Europe, leaving a legacy of fear, respect, and enduring fascination for anyone who studies the skies of the Second World War. For the Allies, the aircraft became a measuring stick, a benchmark of danger in the sky, and a reminder that in aerial warfare, skill and precision often outweighed raw numbers. And for generations studying the war, the Bf-109 stands as one of the most iconic and terrifying fighters ever built, a dark reason why every pilot who saw it up close would never forget it.